The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, a relentless, soft drumming on the canopy that rarely penetrated the dense redwood needles to reach the forest floor. My boots sank just a little with each step, the rich, damp scent of decaying wood and wet earth filling my nostrils. I was deep in Sector 7, a part of the Redwood National Park that saw maybe 5 hikers a year, if that. Most of the trails here were little more than deer paths, and even those eventually gave way to an unbroken expanse of towering trees, their crowns lost in the perpetual twilight above. My map, usually my most trusted companion, felt more like a flimsy suggestion in this ancient cathedral. My compass, a well-worn Sunto that had guided me through countless patrols, began to waver. At first, it was just a slight tremble, easily dismissed as a cold snap or a bit of interference from my radio. But then the needle started to spin, slowly at first, then faster, a mad blur of red and white, like a frantic insect trapped beneath the glass. I tapped it, a familiar ritual, but it only spun more wildly. Simultaneously, my radio, usually a reliable lifeline, erupted in a cacophony of static. It wasn't the usual white noise. This was a harsher, more metallic hiss, punctuated by what sounded like faint, distorted whispers, impossible to decipher. I tried calling in, but all I got was a reply of fractured noise, like a distant scream being torn apart by the wind. I checked my GPS, but the screen was frozen, a jumble of nonsensical coordinates. My heart gave a little lurch. This was new. I was used to the occasional dead zone, but never a complete system failure across all my gear. I pressed on, my unease growing with each step, the forest pressing in, even more silent now that my own equipment had gone rogue. The air grew strangely still, the soft rain no longer reaching me, even though I could hear it drumming faintly far above. The scent of damp earth was replaced by something else, a faint, clean smell, like ozone after a distant lightning strike. And then I saw it. Through the curtain of ancient trees, a light, almost imperceptible, seemed to bleed into the perpetual gloom. It wasn't sunlight, it was too soft, too ethereal. I pushed through a final curtain of ferns, and my breath hitched. Before me was a clearing. Not a natural one, not like any I'd ever seen. This was a perfect circle, perhaps 50 yards in diameter, utterly devoid of trees. The surrounding redwoods, giants that had stood for millennia, simply stopped at its edge, forming an unbroken, impossibly neat wall. The ground within the circle was bare, no fallen needles, no undergrowth, just smooth, dark earth, packed as if by immense pressure. And in the center, standing perfectly upright, was a monolith. It was roughly 15 feet tall, perhaps 4 feet wide, and perfectly smooth, like polished obsidian. It absorbed the sparse light, reflecting nothing, a black void against the muted green of the surrounding forest. As I stepped closer, a faint hum reached me. It wasn't audible in my ears so much as felt in my teeth, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to originate from the very air around the monolith. It intensified as I approached, humming in my bones. My compass, still spinning, practically vibrated in my hand. The radio, forgotten, hissed and popped with its indecipherable chatter. I reached out a hand, drawn by an inexplicable compulsion, but stopped short of touching the monolith. The air around it felt wrong. Not cold, not hot, but utterly inert, like breathing in a vacuum. A shiver, not of cold, but of something far deeper, ran down my spine. This wasn't natural. It defied everything I knew about this forest, about forests in general. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the hum resonating within me, the strange ozone scent filling my lungs. My pragmatic mind, usually so quick to rationalize, was failing me. There was no explanation. No fire, no logging, no natural disaster could create such a perfect void, leaving the surrounding giants untouched. The monolith, it was alien. A sudden sharp crackle from my radio jolted me. The static had lessened, and for a fleeting moment I thought I heard a voice, far away, calling my name. It broke the spell. I took a hesitant step back, then another, the hum seeming to follow me, clinging to my senses. The compass was still a blur, but my mind, slowly, began to clear, the urgent need to get away taking root. I turned and walked, forcing myself not to run, though every instinct screamed at me to flee. I kept the clearing in sight for as long as I could, the dark monolith a stark, unsettling beacon against the muted forest. Eventually, the density of the redwoods swallowed it from view, and I was once again surrounded by the familiar, yet now somehow more menacing, green twilight. The walk back was a blur of heightened senses and creeping paranoia. My compass, eventually settled, pointing vaguely west, though it still quivered. The radio remained stubbornly silent. I moved quickly, relying on instinct, pushing past the memory of the impossible clearing. I stumbled out of the forest hours later, drenched but unharmed, to find my patrol truck exactly where I'd left it. The world outside the forest felt blessedly, jarringly normal. I spent a restless night, the hum of the monolith seeming to echo in my ear whenever I closed my eyes. The image of that perfect empty circle and the black stone in its heart was burned into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd glimpsed something that wasn't meant to be seen, a tear in the fabric of reality. The next morning, I packed a new compass, a spare radio, and a handheld GPS unit, all freshly checked and calibrated. I had to go back. I had to prove it wasn't a hallucination, a trick of the light, or a stress-induced delirium. As a ranger, it was my duty. As a man who valued sanity, it was a desperate necessity. I found the rough area where I believed the clearing had been. The redwoods here were just as immense, the ground just as soft. The air was cool and damp, the usual comforting scent of pine and rich earth filling my senses. My compass held true, pointing north, my GPS locked onto satellites, displaying my coordinates precisely. I walked the grid, eyes scanning, mind alert. Hours passed. The sun, a vague impression of light above the canopy, began to shift, indicating late afternoon. I checked my notes, tracing the path I remembered, correlating landmarks. A particularly gnarled redwood, a fallen giant covered in moss, a small stream that trickled down a rocky incline. I found them all, one by one. I was exactly where I should have been. But there was no clearing. The redwood stood unbroken, a wall of ancient trunks, immense and indifferent. I walked past where the clearing should have been, then back again, crisscrossing the area, my steps becoming more frantic, my breathing shallower. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my composure. It was gone. It simply wasn't there. I spent the rest of the day in a desperate, circular search, pushing deeper than I should have, ignoring the fading light. The forest seemed to stretch on, endlessly. The silence, once comforting, now felt oppressive, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath, watching me. As twilight deepened and the gloom thickened, a new unease settled over me. I began to recognize trees I'd seen hours ago, but now they seemed subtly different, their branches angled strangely, their mossy trunks bearing unfamiliar markings. A particular cluster of huckleberry bushes I'd passed on my first circuit now appeared on my left, when I distinctly remembered it on my right. I dismissed it as fatigue, as the disorienting nature of a dense forest and fading light. But then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible hum. The same vibration I had felt in the clearing, now barely audible, a ghostly resonance that seemed to emanate from the very air around me. It was subtle, easily dismissed as the ringing in my ears, but it was there, a persistent, unsettling bass note beneath the silence. I stopped, straining to listen. The hum seemed to pulse, to wax and wane, and with each subtle shift in its intensity, the landscape around me seemed to rearrange itself. A massive, distinctive redwood, one I had used as a landmark just minutes before, seemed to shrink, its unique twin peaks no longer visible, replaced by a more generic, single-trunked giant. The ground beneath my feet, previously soft with needles, suddenly felt firmer, packed earth. The faint scent of ozone, the same one from the clearing, began to prickle in my nose. A cold dread coiled in my stomach. This wasn't disorientation. This was something far worse. The forest was shifting around me. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible process, like watching a slow-motion dream unfold. Familiar landmarks warped, disappeared, or reappeared in impossible locations. I tried to orient myself by the sun, by the vague direction of the wind, but everything felt skewed, unstable. The hum grew stronger, a low thrum that vibrated in my chest, making my teeth ache. It felt like the forest itself was breathing, a vast, living entity, and I was caught inside its fluctuating lungs. The silence was absolute, save for that pervasive hum and the frantic pounding of my own heart. I pulled out my compass. It spun wildly again, a tiny, useless top in my trembling hand. My GPS was once again frozen, displaying gibberish. My radio was dead. I was utterly, irrevocably lost, not just geographically, but existentially. The rules of space and time, the very laws of nature, seemed to have evaporated. I started to walk, stumbling now, my mind reeling. My fear wasn't of bears or mountain lions. It was of the impossible, of a forest that defied logic, of a clearing that appeared and vanished, leaving behind an echo that warped reality. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every tree trunk seemed to twist into an unfamiliar shape. I came across a fallen redwood, an immense trunk that blocked my path. I remembered passing it earlier, an hour or two ago, but then it had been a mere sapling, easily stepped over. Now it was a colossal barrier. I tried to scramble over it, my hands scraping against the rough bark, but the scale felt wrong. It was too big, impossibly big, even for a redwood. As I struggled, the hum intensified, vibrating through the ground. I paused, heart hammering, and looked up. The canopy, usually a solid, unbroken roof, seemed to shimmer, the gaps between the branches widening and narrowing, revealing fleeting glimpses of an impossibly deep, swirling darkness where the sky should have been. It was like looking into an endless, lightless abyss. I dropped to my knees, panting, the fear now a cold, numbing blanket over me. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block out the hum, but it was inside me, a deep resonance in my bones. My sense of direction was completely gone. Every tree looked the same, yet subtly different. The ground felt sometimes like soft needles, sometimes like hard-packed earth, sometimes like cold, wet stone, even though I hadn't moved. The impossible clearing. It wasn't just a place. It was a focal point, a tear that had opened in this ancient forest, slowly bleeding its impossible reality into the surrounding landscape. The hum was its signature, and it was drawing me back. Or perhaps it was simply changing the world around me, until I was inevitably standing in its dark, silent center once more. I pushed myself up, my legs trembling, and forced myself to walk again, but this time without any hope of finding my way out. The forest was a labyrinth now, a living, breathing paradox, and I was trapped within its impossible walls. The hum was a constant companion, a low, guttural murmur that felt less like a sound and more like a thought, a single, vast, alien consciousness resonating through the wood and soil. As the last vestiges of twilight faded, replaced by an even deeper, more profound darkness, the hum reached a crescendo, a roaring vibration that filled my entire being. I tripped, falling hard onto ground that felt suddenly slick and cold. My eyes, wide with terror, scanned the gloom. And through the shifting shadows, the faint light bled into the forest once more. Not a natural light, but the same ethereal glow I had seen before. It pooled in a perfect circle ahead of me. The surrounding redwoods, immense and dark, formed an unbroken wall. And in the center, perfectly smooth, utterly black, stood the monolith. The hum was deafening now, vibrating through every cell of my body, making my vision blur. The air around the monolith shimmered, distorting the background trees. It wasn't merely a stone, it was a wound, a focal point of wrongness. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that it hadn't moved. I had, or rather, the forest around me had shifted, contracted, rearranged itself, a vast, indifferent puzzle reassembling itself around me, until I was once again delivered to this impossible place. I couldn't move. I could only lie there, my body trembling, my eyes fixed on the black stone. The hum pulsed, rhythmically now, like a slow, deep breath. And in that hum, in the very vibration of the air, I began to perceive something else. Not words, not thoughts, but an immense, incomprehensible presence. Something that had been waiting, patient and vast, in the silence of this ancient forest, subtly reshaping the world around it. And now I was finally, irrevocably, within its grasp. The true horror wasn't being lost. It was realizing I had been found.